Welcome to The Gut Show. I'm your host, Erin Judge, registered dietitian and founder of Digestive. I'm also your fellow IBS warrior. Our goal on this side of the internet is to empower those with IBS and digestive disorders to understand their gut better, to have a healthier relationship with their bodies, and to make confident choices to improve their digestive health. During this season, you can expect a conversation around a hot topic related to gut health, digestion, and IBS. As a disclaimer, I am a dietitian, but I am not your dietitian. So everything covered in this episode is meant to be educational and is purely information that you can take back to your healthcare team in order to make the best decisions for you. If you're new here and something just doesn't feel right in your gut, if your symptoms have led you to this podcast, I invite you to start by taking the quiz, What's Your Poop Personality? Your personality type will unveil what your symptoms may mean, what may be causing them, and what you can do about them. This is a free quiz and you can take it today at gutofate.com or find the direct link below in the show notes. While you're going to take the quiz, let's jump into today's episode. We have made it to the last episode of the season, and we have almost made it to the end of 2024 if you are watching or listening to this in real time. That means it is the perfect time as nutrition messages start popping up, as you know, with New Year's resolutions and all of that stuff. It's the perfect time for us to talk about a topic that I am very passionate about in my practice, but don't always have the time and space to talk about more in depth online. And that is how to improve nutrition as you manage IBS. So whenever we bring up this topic of improving nutrition, we have to kind of look at what happens when so many people start having symptoms or are diagnosed with IBS, another digestive condition, autoimmune condition, whatever it may be. Many times, healthy foods, quote unquote, healthy foods, which are health promoting, that includes large amounts of healthy fats, fruits and vegetables, whole grains, legumes, which is where we find our beans. These are health promoting foods. Often, these also overlap with categories of potential triggers and symptom causing foods. So whenever people are starting to struggle with digestion symptoms, they may find that the fewer fruits and vegetables that they eat, the less whole grains that they eat, the better that they feel short term. And this is the joke that kind of comes online where they say, you know, I ate a big salad and felt terrible, but I had McDonald's French fries and I felt fine, right? That's something that a lot of us can relate to, because you may find that like some safe foods that you have are not necessarily considered the most health promoting foods that are out there. And so that can leave you feeling like you have to choose between eating healthy and keeping symptoms down, when in reality that is not true. You don't have to make that choice. It is possible to do both. And so that is what we are going to get into and talk about in this episode. And hopefully you leave the episode feeling more empowered to add things into your life, or even look at how you're managing your IBS, your symptoms in a different way, with more of a kind of long-term view in mind, that again feels empowering versus defeating. That is my intention and my goal for you as much as possible. Now, before we get into the conversation, because unfortunately the cultures that we live in have really taken over nutrition to be what makes you thin or skinny, or these like weird rules that lead to a lot of disordered eating and thoughts around food. That is not where we're going today. So if that does trigger you to talk about health in that way from a nutrition perspective, maybe come back to this episode when it feels better or right for you. But if that's kind of in your mind, like, oh, well, this means I have to be thin, or I have to, eat like this particular way. Nope, drop that from your mind. That is not what we're going to go into it with. So any preconceived ideas or notions about that, just kind of let it go and come in with more of an open mind and perspective with me, because I think that we'll get a lot more out of this conversation without the muddiness and cloudiness of what we consider kind of diet culture or messages in our culture related to health and nutrition that may not be fully accurate or even applicable to you personally. Okay, So with that in mind, let's jump in and let's start with kind of the overarching theme here is that there is a big difference in preventing your symptoms versus supporting the overall function and resilience of your gut. This is the difference between short-term focus and long-term focus when we are thinking about symptom relief. And this is where diet restriction tends to fit in. Symptoms can arise because of an unhealthy gut. Now, the unhealthy gut could be due to choices you've made. That is possible. The diet you've eaten, the things in your environment that you have control of. Oftentimes, this unhealthy, dysfunctional gut is not due to something that you chose or that was in your control. And this is where digestive disease fits in, IBS, IBD, Crohn's, celiac disease, all of that fits in here, right? Because maybe you were exposed to a pathogen, because, something happened in your environment, because you had to take this like treatment or medication for something else that was going on, because of these genetic factors, because of something that your immune system went through, you have an unhealthy gut. That is the reason why symptoms are happening, right? That is kind of that, if you want to think about a root, right? It's the fact that the gut itself is imbalanced. There's something going on there. It's not functioning properly. It is in a state that we would call unhealthy because it's not doing its job well. That's what would be unhealthy, right? Not doing its job. That is why we have symptoms. So like what we see in like autoimmune disorders or disease and other conditions, even with IBS, once the body has been impacted and isn't functioning as it should be, the signs of poor health begin to show up stronger and the need for more health support will grow. This means that the more unhealthy your gut becomes, right? If your gut is not functioning well, and then that's causing symptoms, you need health in your gut, right? To fix the unhealthy part of the gut, right? We have to try, and it's not always a simple fix or cure, but we have to support the health of your gut. You have a stronger need for it because you're in a state of what we call unhealthy, right? We're lacking health. Things are not functioning. If we don't do that, because it's already unhealthy, the more unhealthy it becomes, the worse that the symptoms are going to be, the less resilience that you're going to have, the more problems that can arise and occur. So a state of an unhealthy gut can cause symptoms. The state of an unhealthy gut means we need more health in the gut. We have a stronger demand for what can be considered healthy or kind of addressing that problem. Now, when we think about symptom triggers, this is more surface level, right? Because the symptom triggers are only triggers because your body is facing a bigger problem, right? Because the gut is not functioning. That's the only reason these symptom triggers even exist or trigger symptoms for you. So it's very surface level, really about the symptoms themselves, not necessarily the actual cause of the symptoms. So if you have IBS triggers, you only have them because you have IBS, right? Those without IBS may not have those triggers because they don't have IBS. Important to remember. This is a part of acceptance. I think that is actually really helpful and empowering is, I have a condition, my gut is not functioning. That means I need more, and these triggers are present for me. It's not my fault that these triggers are present for me, but they are present for me because I have IBS, because my gut is not functioning properly. So this is what I typically will refer to as the difference between IBS triggers and IBS drivers. Triggers are going to trigger symptoms because of the problem. Drivers are the things that are really the problems. What is that state of not health in the gut, lack of health in the gut? The drivers can include, changing gut motility or how the gut moves, the gut microbiome and how it's made up, like an unideal makeup there, increased gut permeability or that kind of leakiness of the gut, which can cause more symptoms and more struggle and kind of less resilience, and even altered immune activation, as well as altered gut-brain communication. Those all are potential drivers that are what makes up what I call unhealthy, right? So this is where diet and nutrition actually fit in. There is a difference between reducing your triggers and addressing your drivers. So with your diet, reducing your triggers may look like a low FODMAP diet. It may look like reducing different stimulants in your diet, like coffee or raw foods or large meals, maybe even artificial sweeteners, things like that. It could also look like modifying fiber types and how food is cooked. Typically, by reducing triggers with your diet, there is some level of modification and potential restriction that is involved. And the goal is to get the symptoms down. Now, because of what we just talked about, this is only one small piece of the plan for keeping symptoms down and actually managing IBS and managing your condition or treating your condition. This is surface level, right? We're just getting the symptoms down so you feel more comfortable. Whenever we only do this and we stay at the surface, all that's underneath, those drivers, right? The unhealthy gut. If we don't do the surface level part properly, we're missing the bottom part. We may find that that state of unhealth, not a word, but the health of the gut declines. And then those drivers become stronger. And then symptoms get stronger, regardless of that surface level work that you did. So this is where some people will say, I did the low FODMAP diet and it worked for a few months and then it just stopped working. Or like I restricted all of this, I saw some relief, then my symptoms came back, so I restricted more. My symptoms came back, I restricted more. That's a sign that you've only been focused on trying to reduce symptoms, and that's a very short-term focus, and you missed supporting the health of your gut. So using diet to address IBS drivers and support the health of your gut actually looks like balancing your meals with carbs, fats, and proteins, making sure that all of your micronutrient needs have been met through a variety of food sources. This is really important. We may even take into account your labs and see, okay, not only what are you eating, are you meeting all of your needs, but what's showing up in your labs? Are you deficient? Are there any signs of malnutrition? Which does sometimes look like not eating enough and losing weight. Sometimes malnutrition looks like having certain nutrient deficiencies and major gaps in your diet from things that your body needs. If your gut doesn't have all those building blocks of nutrients that it needs to function, it's not going to function. It can't kind of work against those problems that it's facing if it doesn't have what it needs to do so, right? So we have to make sure that those needs are being met.
Are you listening to today's episode with the main thought being, what are the steps that I can take to get rid of my symptoms right now? While I hope that the information that we share in every episode of The Gut Show leaves you feeling more empowered and more confident in your body, it's not always going to solve your problem or give you a clear direction for your specific symptoms and your needs. The Master Method membership is an online program for the person with chronic digestive symptoms and IBS who wants step-by-step guidance to understand their body, address the drivers of IBS, reduce symptoms, and build resilience in your gut long term. This membership includes a step-by-step course and a dietitian-led community that teaches you how to holistically address each symptom and the IBS drivers, how to reduce symptoms more strategically and with confidence, and guidelines for better gut health long term so that you're not only thinking about today, but you're also improving your outcomes in the future. It is time to ditch the symptoms and get your life back. The membership is your first step. You can learn more and enroll at ibsmastermethod.com and use the code GUTSHOW, GUTSHOW, GUTSHOW for $25 off your enrollment fee. Now, let's get back to today's episode.
We also want to make sure we're adding in extra virgin olive oil and omega-3 rich foods. This can help support the effects of inflammation, especially if there is some post-infectious history or we think the immune system or gut permeability may be involved. We want to increase fiber diversity to support a variety of gut microbes. And that comes a bit with that diverse intake of foods, like eating the rainbow, eating a variety of plant foods. That can make a big difference. And that those are the building blocks of a healthy diet. Sometimes restriction is involved. Yes, there are foods that can be negative towards health, right? They are unhealthy, meaning they do not support health outcomes. More often than not, focusing on what we're adding to support health is actually more valuable and more effective than focusing on what we remove, especially when restriction is already in place to reduce symptoms. And so this is the part that I want to focus on, is how we expand and then how we're consistent with that expansion. Now, a lot of this variety I mentioned in these micronutrients and fiber, all of these things are typically found in these plant foods. And these plant foods tend to be symptom triggers. So you can see where only focusing on the symptoms and those short-term results right at that surface level, you may get yourself into a place where you are now supporting your gut even less than maybe where you began. And now there's no room for that health to improve of the gut. And so that symptom reduction may kind of get you by for a little bit, but then start showing up either with more symptoms again or other problems in the body. Hormone imbalances, thyroid issues, metabolic issues, heart issues, other things may pop up because, again, we're not meeting our health needs to prevent those things and support kind of the function of the rest of the body, including the gut. So with a broad view, this makes sense, right? And you may agree with me. But if we get into the specifics, sometimes it can feel hard to both improve your symptoms and work on optimal nutrition for improved IBS drivers. I just mentioned how that pitfall can happen. It happens because it is really hard to avoid it. And I recognize that as both a patient and as a dietitian and a provider. I see this all the time, even from people who are very well meaning, who have a lot of knowledge, a lot of resources. This is a very common pitfall because it is very challenging to avoid. And that is where creativity and personalization fit in. Truthfully, that is where, working with a dietitian who really believes in this approach and wants to push you forward to this approach, and it gives you the time together to get to that approach. That is what we do. Like, our show notes have info on that if you want that information. But that's where that can be the most valuable, so that you can avoid that pitfall and get to a place where you are kind of doing both. And it may look slower, whereas someone who doesn't have IBS or a problem going on in their gut, they may be able to eat a well-balanced, healthy diet tomorrow and it be no big deal. For you, it may take many months to get to that point where symptoms are down and your diet has been expanded and is supporting you. But it is worth it to take that time, do that work, go through a bit of that struggle, right? Climb that mountain now in order to have the results a year down the road, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, 50 years down the road, however much time on this earth and planet in this body that you have left, right? We want to make sure we're doing what we can and using the tools that we can to give you the best outcomes possible. We can't prevent everything, but we can do our best. And we can reduce risk significantly by supporting the body well. So what does that approach look like if you're thinking, okay, well, I can't work with someone one-to-one, or I just want to maybe dig into this more on my own? This is where more of kind of a Mediterranean diet approach comes in. Now, the Mediterranean diet is not like modern day what happens in the Mediterranean region. They should probably rename the diet, but it came out of a lot of research of the olive growing areas of the Mediterranean many, many years ago. And they found that these people groups that kind of lived in these areas were living for a long time without a lot of disease. So they studied what they ate, what they did, what was going on. And then this has been studied throughout many, many, many years since then for many different disease states, and has constantly showed up to be the most supportive approach to nutrition across the board. What's really great about this diet is that it is well balanced and it doesn't heavily restrict food groups. And so it is sustainable for people. It includes foods that are enjoyable. It doesn't feel like the food rules that you may, see online or experience, through other types of diets you've tried. It is very much about expansion, which is really beautiful, and about eating kind of whole foods and a variety of those foods. So this looks like more fish, incorporating extra virgin olive oil daily, fruits and vegetables from all the colors that are there. You can do this through low FODMAP sources to make this more IBS friendly. And there are a lot of options. If you weren't given options, if you're following a low FODMAP diet and you feel like there's nothing you can eat, we need to recheck those resources because there are a lot of options that you actually may have for variety. Easy to digest legumes. Legumes are added very consistently in the Mediterranean diet. You can make these easier to digest by soaking them well, rinsing them, doing canned and then rinsing them, especially chickpeas and lentils, which tend to be lower FODMAP. Balanced meals, adequate lean proteins, plant proteins as well. Firm tofu is something that's typically well tolerated. Quinoa, shelled edamame, those are great protein sources from animal or from plant sources instead of just animal sources. And then again, fish tends to be pretty well tolerated. and then increasing your fiber intake because whole grains and plentiful fruits and vegetables are added. And so we can do this slowly by increasing your tolerance to fiber, choosing low FODMAP sources first, and then expanding it from there. And that's an approach that we typically take to get symptoms down and expand. Symptoms down and expand. The and expand is the part that is the most important. So aside from a low FODMAP diet and like starting in that way, there are some studies that show simply a Mediterranean diet without any FODMAP restriction can improve IBS. So for some people, going full on to like eating that variety, your symptoms might worsen at the beginning and then get better. That's kind of what the research shows. And that's an approach. You can also take that blended approach, which is what we typically do in practice, but it really depends on what's available to you, what you want to do, and the type of guidance that you're given. Because whatever approach you take, it's not always going to be so straightforward with IBS or with a condition, again, because you've got those drivers at play. And you may have to kind of modify your plan for the driver while that improves and then, kind of build up from there. So again, it looks a little bit like puzzle piecing a bit, but if you have felt like you've been stuck in this place where you feel like you're just restricting, isolating, and it feels like your health is honestly declining at the sake, like for the sake of your symptoms to improve, I'm wanting to leave you with the encouragement that it is possible to have both. You deserve it. It is possible. I've seen it in myself as an IBS patient. I've also seen it in many, like hundreds of people with IBS across the spectrum of disease states. It is possible. It takes work, it takes intention, it takes guidance, but it is possible. So as we head into a new year, as you are going through the holidays, maybe, really reflecting on what you want out of your life moving forward, whatever it may be, this is a part, I really encourage you to bring some focus to. And again, bring that focus in as a way of expanding, adding value, adding longevity, moving you towards what you want most, not a place of restriction or rules, right? There's so much life and freedom in this approach of expansion. So if you needed that today, there you go. You can improve nutrition as you manage your IBS symptoms. This is an approach to do that. And of course, we don't leave out all the other pieces of health, your other parts of your environment, some of which we've talked about throughout the season. But I appreciate you tuning in. I would love to hear your takeaway from today's episode, or even just the season as a whole. If you want to share on social media, you'll see my little tag in the show notes. Tag me in your story or wherever you're sharing so that I can see and continue that conversation with you. And then, next year, we'll come back for another season, and I'll see you again here or see you in short form content through socials and on these platforms. So cheers to the end of another amazing season, and cheers to better gut health as we move into 2025.